Between trucks and tanks, World War II armies relied on a vehicle that rarely receives the attention it deserves: the half-track. While tanks dominated headlines and trucks handled logistics, half-tracks quietly became one of the most important tools of mechanized warfare. They were designed to solve a critical battlefield problem: how to move infantry, weapons, and supplies across rough terrain while keeping pace with armored formations. A half-track combines two different mobility systems into one vehicle. The front uses conventional wheels for steering and road travel, while the rear employs tracked suspension similar to a tank. This hybrid design allowed half-tracks to perform where standard trucks struggled, especially in mud, snow, sand, and uneven ground common across European and Eastern Front battlefields. At the same time, half-tracks were far cheaper, faster, and easier to maintain than fully tracked armored vehicles. Unlike tanks, half-tracks were not intended to fight enemy armor directly. Their primary role was mobility and support. They transported mechanized infantry, carried heavy weapons, towed artillery, served as command vehicles, and even functioned as mobile anti-aircraft platforms. In many cases, they allowed infantry units to advance alongside tanks rather than lag behind on foot. By the early years of the war, half-tracks had become a cornerstone of modern military doctrine. Germany, the United States, and several other nations adopted them in large numbers, each adapting the concept to their own industrial and tactical needs. To understand how World War II armies fought and moved, it is essential to understand the half-track, the vehicle that bridged the gap between firepower and mobility. Germany was the nation that most fully embraced the half-track concept before and during World War II. Facing limitations in tank production and fuel supplies, the German army focused heavily on mechanized infantry that could move at the same pace as its armored divisions. Half-tracks became the solution, forming a critical link between panzer units and foot soldiers during operations. The two most important German half-tracks were the CD-KFZ 250 and CD-KFZ 251. The lighter CD-KFZ 250 was primarily used for reconnaissance, command, and liaison roles. Compact and fast, it allowed reconnaissance units to operate ahead of armored formations while maintaining protection from small arms fire. Despite its smaller size, it proved highly adaptable and was produced in numerous variants. The larger and more influential vehicle was the CD-KFZ 251. Designed to transport a full infantry squad, it became the standard armored personnel carrier of Germany's mechanized units. The CD-KFZ 251 was not simply a troop carrier, it served as a versatile battlefield platform. Variants were equipped with mortars, anti-tank guns, flamethrowers, rocket launchers, and anti-aircraft weapons, transforming the half-track into a multi-role combat system. German half-tracks were central to combined arms warfare. Infantry transported by CD-KFZ 251s could rapidly dismount under fire, support advancing tanks, and secure terrain without losing momentum. However, the complexity of German designs and limited industrial capacity meant that half-tracks were never available in sufficient numbers. As the war progressed, shortages forced many units to rely increasingly on trucks, reducing the effectiveness of fully mechanized infantry formations. Despite these limitations, German half-tracks defined how mechanized warfare was fought in the early and middle years of World War II. Their tactical impact far exceeded their numbers, making them one of the most influential military vehicles of the era. While Germany pioneered the tactical use of half-tracks, the United States perfected their large-scale production and operational standardization. American military doctrine emphasized mobility, logistics, and reliability, and U.S. half-tracks reflected these priorities. Rather than producing many highly specialized designs, the United States focused on a small number of adaptable vehicles that could be manufactured quickly and maintained easily in the field. The most widely used American half-tracks were the M2 and M3. The M2 was originally designed as an artillery tractor and reconnaissance vehicle, while the M3 was optimized to carry an infantry squad. Although similar in appearance, the two vehicles served distinct roles within U.S. mechanized units, Both featured relatively light armor, open troop compartments, and flexible internal layouts that allowed for rapid role conversion. One of the greatest strengths of U.S. half-tracks was their modularity. The same basic chassis could be configured as a troop carrier, ambulance, command vehicle, anti-aircraft platform, or weapons carrier. This versatility allowed American forces to adapt quickly to different operational environments, from the deserts of North Africa to the hedgerows of Normandy and the forests of Western Europe. Beyond American use, U.S. half-tracks played a major role through the Lend-Lease program. Vehicles such as the M5 and M9 were supplied in large numbers to Allied nations, including the Soviet Union, Britain, and Free French forces. In many cases, these half-tracks became the backbone of mechanized units that lacked domestic production capacity. By prioritizing simplicity, reliability, and mass production, the United States ensured that half-tracks were available in numbers that Germany could never match. While less sophisticated than some German designs, American half-tracks proved that industrial strength and logistical efficiency could be just as decisive as battlefield innovation. Although Germany and the United States were the primary users of half-tracks during World War II, several other nations adopted the concept to varying degrees. Their experiences with half-tracks often reflected industrial limitations, pre-war doctrine, and reliance on foreign designs rather than large-scale domestic production. France played an important early role in half-track development before the war. Vehicles based on the Citroën Cagresse system used a flexible track at the rear combined with front wheels, influencing later German designs. However, following the defeat of France in 1940, French half-track production effectively ended, and many existing vehicles were captured and repurposed by German forces for secondary roles. Italy experimented with half-track designs, but never fielded them in large numbers. Limited industrial capacity and a focus on lighter vehicles meant that Italian forces relied more heavily on trucks and wheeled transports. As a result, half-tracks had only a minor impact on Italian mechanized operations. Japan made very limited use of half-tracks, primarily in China and Manchuria. Japanese military doctrine emphasized infantry mobility and light vehicles rather than heavily mechanized formations. Combined with terrain and production constraints, this resulted in half-tracks remaining rare within Japanese forces. The Soviet Union did not develop significant indigenous half-track designs during the war, but it made extensive use of American half-tracks supplied through Lend-Lease. Vehicles such as the M3 and M5 were highly valued for their reliability and cross-country performance, especially when compared to Soviet trucks. These vehicles supported reconnaissance units, artillery, and mechanized infantry, contributing significantly to Red Army mobility during the later stages of the war. Overall, half-tracks outside Germany and the United States were often shaped by necessity rather than doctrine. Whether captured, imported, or produced in small numbers, they filled critical gaps in mobility and support, reinforcing the half-track's role as a practical solution to the demands of modern warfare. On the battlefield, half-tracks were valued not for heavy armor or direct combat power, but for their ability to support and enable other units. Their true strength lay in flexibility. Commanders could adapt half-tracks to a wide range of tactical roles, making them one of the most versatile vehicles of World War II. The primary role of the half-track was mechanized infantry transport. By carrying soldiers close to the front line, half-tracks allowed infantry to dismount quickly and fight in coordination with tanks. This reduced fatigue, increased operational speed, and helped maintain momentum during offensives. In German and American units alike, this capability was essential for combined arms operations. Half-tracks were also widely used as weapons platforms. Machine guns, mortars, anti-tank guns, and anti-aircraft weapons were mounted on half-track chassis, creating mobile fire support vehicles. These variants could rapidly reposition to respond to threats, escort convoys, or reinforce vulnerable sectors. Although lightly armored, their mobility often proved more valuable than protection. Another critical function was artillery and logistics support. Half-tracks towed field guns, transported ammunition, and served as supply vehicles in areas where wheeled trucks struggled. In harsh terrain and poor weather conditions, Their tracked rear suspension provided a decisive advantage. Additionally, half-tracks frequently served as command, communications, and medical evacuation vehicles, keeping leadership and support elements close to frontline units. Despite their usefulness, half-tracks had clear limitations. Their open tops exposed crews to artillery and air attack, and their armor offered limited protection against heavy weapons. Nevertheless, when used correctly and in coordination with other arms, half-tracks multiplied the effectiveness of entire formations. They were not designed to dominate the battlefield, but to ensure that infantry, firepower, and command elements arrived where they were needed, when they were needed. Half-tracks were never the most heavily armed or heavily armored vehicles of World War II, yet their impact on modern warfare was profound. They represented a practical solution to one of the central problems of mechanized war: how to move infantry, weapons, and command elements across difficult terrain while maintaining operational speed. In this role, half-tracks proved indispensable. For Germany, half-tracks enabled the early success of Blitzkrieg by allowing mechanized infantry to operate in close cooperation with tanks. For the United States, they demonstrated the power of industrial standardization and mass production, ensuring that mechanized units could be equipped in numbers sufficient to sustain large-scale operations. Through Lend-Lease, half-tracks also strengthened Allied forces that lacked the capacity to produce such vehicles themselves, extending their influence far beyond their country of origin. Despite their effectiveness, half-tracks were ultimately a transitional technology. Advances in suspension systems, engines, and fully tracked armored personnel carriers gradually rendered the hybrid design obsolete after the war. New vehicles offered better protection, improved mobility, and greater battlefield survivability. However, the half-track's role in shaping mechanized infantry doctrine cannot be overstated. In many ways, half-tracks laid the foundation for modern armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles. They proved that mobility, coordination, and logistical support were just as important as firepower and armor. While often overshadowed by tanks and aircraft, half-tracks were a quiet force multiplier, vehicles that ensured armies could move, fight, and command effectively across the vast and unforgiving battlefields of World War II.